I believe we'll get started. If I could have your attention. It does not seem very loud. Folks, we're ready to start if you're ready to listen. First of all, I want to apologize for the lateness of the start, but when we got here, the building was locked, and we couldn't get in for 15 minutes until Cassie was called and came down and saved the day. The keys evidently got changed, and Cat TV got the wrong keys or something. So anyway, I apologize. Good evening. I am Suzanne Kirkpatrick, the current president of AAUW, the American Association of University Women, Bennington chapter. I welcome you to this forum. I'm very glad to see you here. We've been offering forums for 20 years. Tonight, you're going to hear from the candidates who are going to go to, I was going to say Jefferson City, but that's Missouri, to Montpelier. Both the representatives and the senators. All of the candidates were invited, and all of them have appeared. We can, in the short time we have, not deal with all the questions you might have. But the committee that got together to craft the questions also went into the community and asked various people for their ideas of what were the most compelling questions that people might have. So we tried. At the close of the forum, you will be invited to join us for refreshments and discussions with the candidates. I did forget to say that there will be 3 or 4 questions. Hopefully, there will be time for questions from the audience, but we have many people and supposedly just 2 hours to do this in. At the end, we join us for refreshments and informal discussions with the candidates. Okay, I'm going to turn the floor over to Kathy Wagenish, the former president of AAUW, who will moderate and explain to you the order that the candidates will talk in or how it was come up with.
It seemed to be easier than switching the microphone. Okay, a little bit about procedure, since I'm the procedure person. Just before tonight's meeting began, each of the candidates drew a number randomly from a box, and that determines the speaking order of the candidates of the first question. And then the remaining questions are randomized so that nobody will have the prime spot every time. After the first question, you'll have 90 seconds to respond to the question. And we have 2 timers sitting down here. Raise your hands, guys. One has the stopwatch and the other has the cards. We have a debate on what color that is, yellow or orange or amber or whatever. Hold it up, Jennifer, so they can see it. When that happens, you've got 15 seconds left. The red one means hush. Okay? And we'd ask that you actually do stop speaking when the red one comes up. If you have to hurry a final word, you can do that, but you're eating into your fellow candidates' time if you take more time than you have. Also, while we're thinking about it, would everybody silence your cell phone? Okay, and since we have so many candidates here tonight, if everyone takes the entire allotted time that you have, we will use up our full 2 hours with the questions that we have. So help us conserve our time, audience, by holding all of your applause till the very end and then give a rousing round for the whole shooting batch, okay? And if by any chance we have time left because people speak shorter than we expect them to, we'll take a question or two from the audience. And if that happens, we'll let you know where to stand and how to do that. So, without any further ado, let's go to question 1. And question 1 is not really so much a question as it is an introduction. This is your chance to introduce yourself in a whole 2 minutes to the audience. Your first question is multi-part. Who are you? Why are you running for Vermont? Why are you running for election to the Vermont State Legislature? And how do you plan to gather input from your constituents? You will have 2 minutes. The first speaker, by random draw, is Rob Plunkett.
And that's me. And thank you. That's turned it off. The green light is on, so we're ready. So I'm Rob Plunkett. I'm from Bennington. I'm a Democratic candidate for the Bennington Senate District. And we're pretty far into the campaign right now, so I'm going to move the question a little bit from why I'm running, which I've talked about a lot, but what sets me apart from the others. And I think they'll correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but one thing, of course, is that I'm from Bennington. You'll see next to my name or under my name, Bennington. And I think that's very important to have someone from Bennington going back to the Senate. We had 2 senators from Bennington for a very long time, and now we still need one. And what that also means is that I'm from Bennington. I grew up in Bennington. I'm living in the house that I grew up in, and I've seen it change over the years. And I think having that historical memory of what Bennington was when I was a kid to what it is now and what it can be in the future is very important. But one other thing that sets me apart from most of the rest here is what I do for a living. For 17 years, I've actually represented in some ways Bennington County. I'm a prosecutor for Bennington County, and I've had a part in every single community in most of the Bennington Senate District. There are 4 other towns that aren't part of Bennington County, but the only other person I know in the Senate race that has is Seth, who's been in the Senate before. So Seth and I have both represented all of Bennington County in one way or another. And in my way, it's a community that's very different from what most people see. And I see every day the impact of poverty, addiction, mental health issues, and homelessness. And because of that is why I'm running, and also why I'm attached to the community. Time is up.
Thank you. Number 2 is Cynthia Browning.
Thank you. I'm Cynthia Browning. I'm from Arlington, and I'm running for the state senate. Remember, there are 2 state senate seats for this district, so you have 2 votes. And I would ask that you consider voting for me as one of your 2 votes. I'm running as an independent because at this point I feel that sometimes party politics, rhetoric, and ideology is actually getting in the way of practical solutions. My top issues are that education property taxes are too high and housing is too costly. I did serve in the House representing Manchester, Sandgate, Sunderland, and Arlington for a number of years, and I actually served on the House Ways and Means Committee. We tried to address some of the problems with the Education Finance Committee, and over again, the Senate blocked our reforms. That's why I'm running for this Senate. Someone has to be in the Senate who understands how the system works and how to change it in a creative and pragmatic way. I would start with the fact that the state is actually using the education fund to finance non-education costs, which means that your property taxes are about 20 cents higher than they otherwise would be. That has to stop. So I have the expertise from having been in the legislature on House Ways and Means. I have a PhD in economics. I can help address these problems. I'm living in Arlington. I work in Arlington. I've worked in Manchester. I've worked in Bennington. I've worked in Sunderland. I went to Bennington College, whether that's a positive or a negative, that's what I did. And my mother lived in Shaftesbury. When I was in the legislature, I worked on the recovery from Tropical Storm Irene, which touched all of the towns in our county, and I worked on solving the PFAS problem in Bennington. When I was in the legislature, I held weekly Saturday breakfasts, and I would seek to do similar outreach again.
Thank you. Number 3 just happens to be the other Senate candidate, Seth Bongartz.
So, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming. I've dedicated my entire adult life to public service. From serving on the rescue squad as a younger person, to the zoning board as town moderator, chair of the Burn Burton board for 15 years, to chairing the board of the North Shire Land Trust, to 5 terms in the legislature, I've been involved virtually every day since my early 20s. In my recent 4 years in the House, I've been a driving force toward getting low and moderate income housing built. I'm also a recognized leader for the protection of our environment, be it streams, lakes, forests, regulatory reform, or making Act 250 work better. I'm deeply proud of the role I've been able to play these last 4 years. I've been effective because I do not seek publicity or otherwise self-promote. I simply do the work. For the last 3 summers and falls, I've pulled together diverse groups of people from around the state and put together 3 comprehensive bills, all of which have involved both housing and environmental protection. They are now law. We have a number of issues facing us, from preparing for more 100-year floods, which, by the way, now come every year, to continuing to work on housing, to creating vibrant communities, to tackling the out-of-control costs of healthcare, to building a culture of tolerance, which is so critical to keeping and attracting young people to Vermont. COVID exposed the inherent weaknesses of our school funding system. The result is double-digit increases in the property taxes that people can't afford to pay. We need to blow that system up and start over from scratch. I believe that's going to happen. The next 2 years are going to require thoughtful leadership. And by the way, as to keeping in touch with constituents, before I forget to say this, I have always done coffee hours. I've been in the legislature over the different years for 5 terms and always done coffee hours, and of course I'll continue to do that in different communities. Thoughtful leadership, that's why I'm running with Rob Plunkett. We have a sort of classic north-south ticket, which helps with keeps both ends of the county in the mix.
And your time is up.
We'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Number 4, Mary Morrissey.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the invitation to come to this forum. I'm Mary Morrissey, and I have served in the legislature for 14 terms. I have served on various committees, including appropriations, which gave me a great learning in how the finances for the state work. I've always been a person here in town that is very easily accessible to anyone, and to help with constituent issues, which I pride myself on in my 28 years of service, of trying to help any individual that calls to help them get through to getting an answer. Sometimes it's not the answer they want, but when they get a call from a commissioner or someone from the agency, they're pleased to at least have an understanding of what prevents them from either getting it or getting it. The issues I think that are most important, especially at this time, are getting cost control in many of our high-ticket issues such as education and the property tax, such as health care. You know, it was tried several years ago to have a single-payer health care, which everyone wants great health care, but even Governor Peter Shumlin at that time looked at the cost and pulled the plug on it, because we've got to look at legislation hand in hand with.
Thank you, Mary. Next is Jim Carroll.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to address voters. Who am I? My name is Jim Carroll. I was born and raised here in Bennington. I moved back from New York City in 2003 to take care of my folks. Why I'm running? Well, I think it goes back to how I was raised here in Bennington, and who are the models for me. And it was about service, public service. My mother and father were deeply involved in local politics, and the other models for me, the important ones, were the late Timmy Corcoran and Ralph Wright. They did things without much fanfare, without any, really. And I've modeled myself on them. But what's been most important to me throughout my time in service, 10 years on the select board and 4 in the legislature, is service. I'm working class. I understand what it means to struggle. You know, to answer the central question is, you know, how do I intend to keep in touch with constituents? And it's what I've always been doing. Being out and at events as much as I can. I have a full-time job, so I'm not as able to do that. However, going out to a grocery store, getting stopped there, being on the street, telephone calls, and they can happen at any hour of the night. But it's always been about service. You know, one of the things that I learned early in the legislature is when people need help, and I'm sad to say it, they don't often get their phone calls returned. But with the word representative in front of it, people pick up, and that's a sad fact. Especially during COVID, I had people calling me in tears because they couldn't put food on the table, their rent and their mortgage was due, and helping those people.
Your time is up.
No. Okay.
Next speaker is Steve Berry.
I'd like to thank the AAUW for hosting us tonight. It's really nice to be here. I'm a pastor. I serve the oldest church building in continuous operation in the state of Vermont. It's the 1786 Rupert Meeting House. And the congregational tradition, for those of you who don't know, is a tradition that is the meeting house tradition. The town meeting came out of the meeting house of the congregational churches. So I learned a lot about face-to-face interactions and how you deal with people in the meeting house tradition. And to answer the first question, the last question first, that's the way you do it with face-to-face meetings, with having people come from the community to meet with you on a regular basis, bi-weekly or monthly, so that you can hear your constituents. I think I didn't do as good a job of that because I was working while I was also in the legislature last time. So it was the clean air, it was the act that we're now looking at that I voted for without having sufficient information. So I had to reverse my understanding. But the reason why I'm an independent, why I'm running as an independent, is because I think the system is really broken. It's I can't even understand my own party anymore. The Democratic Party is not the party that I understood and grew up with. It was the party for the worker, a party for the poor. Now it's the war party. Dick Cheney belongs to it. And wasn't Dick Cheney involved with the neocons and George W. Bush? I don't even see where what's happened in the last 20 years has become nothing but one large uniparty, but the amount of money that now goes into the war trickles down all these wars and affects us right now. So we can't have good health care, good education, or all the things that we need. So that's why I'm running, because you need another voice and not something in a lane that stays there forever.
Thank you. Joe Gervais is next.
I'm Joe Jervis, and I'm running to give Vermonters a voice up in Montpelier. I've been out knocking on a lot of doors over the last 6 months and trying to understand what the pulse is of the Senate district. I come with an ear that has been well-trained over the years in listening to people. I spent 20 years in product management, where my job was to listen to customers, understand what their needs were, and then work with my engineering team to build products that worked for those customers. I spent time in the missions field. And again, it's understanding people with very diverse cultures from the culture I come from, and learn how to serve them by listening to them. So, I've been in many different environments where I learned how to listen and really hear what you're saying. And I think that's something that's missing right now with the legislature. A lot of challenges with affordability. The other candidates have talked a bit about that, with housing, with education, with the climate challenges that we've got. How do we afford what we need to do? A lot of concerns here, particularly in Bennington, on public safety. And I will bring those concerns and advocate for you. I've got a lot of experience in business, both running my own businesses and being business line managers. So I know how to look at the books. I know how to figure out where the waste is and how to fix it, and know how to have the difficult conversations that we seem to struggle with some of the current legislation that's going through. As far as listening to you, as others have said, the coffee hours, personal interactions, whether it's at homes or out in public, I'm always there to listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Corcoran, you're next.
Good evening. My name is Tim Corcoran, and I currently serve as the state representative for Bennington District 2-1. I've been a member of the Vermont legislature for the last 22 years, and during my tenure, I've had the privilege of sitting on the House Transportation Committee. Outside of my legislative duties, I'm currently a real estate agent, which affords me a unique perspective on the housing market and the challenges that we face ahead. All too often, I have observed representatives in Montpelier who are quick to dismiss new ideas without giving them their due consideration. This tendency to prematurely reject proposals is precisely why I believe I still add value as a representative. My approach is always to evaluate the pros and cons of the bill before making a decision. My guiding philosophy when casting votes is to first vote my conscience, then the constituents, and then my party. And I believe over the last 22 years, this approach has served me and my constituents well. Among the challenging decisions that I have been proud to support over the last past biennium is the child care funding bill. That got a lot of pushback. People are upset with that we were going to do a payroll tax. And could there have been another avenue to fund that? Maybe, but that was a train that was leaving the station. And this assures that family no longer have to make that difficult choice between staying home or going to work. So I'm very proud of that bill. And the second is the DMV funding bill. That was the fee bill hasn't been raised in 7 years. And you can only imagine over the 7 years, the cost of inflation, workforce, health care, that means less product, less things getting done on the roadway. So that needed to be done. And as we look ahead to the next biennial session, there's going to be many more challenging issues to tackle, and most notably is the property tax reform.
Thank you.
Still got another paragraph. I'll finish this up quick.
No. 2 minutes. Anthony Cook.
Hello, my name's Anthony Cook, and I'm running here in Bennington District 2 to be a state representative. And I'm 57 years old. I lived here most of my life. 3 generations in my family have lived here. I am an 87 graduate of Mount Anthony, a 2004 graduate of CCV with a degree in business management. I am owner-operator of Classic Metal Restorations. I've been doing that for the past 16 years, and that's in South Shasberry. I've had various jobs here. I've worked in the factories. As a matter of fact, while I was going to school, I was working my way through school in that factory, working 45 hours plus a week. And I understand the working class, the middle class in this area, and I can tell you that the working poor is becoming more and more of a thing. People's dream is to be the middle class, the affordable middle class, but more and more people, as I go through this district, they think themselves as the working poor. And you know what? What this Democratic supermajority has done is they're completely out of touch, and that's why I'm running. I mean, in a time with high inflation, and the last thing you want to do is attack energy. For a good economy, you need affordable energy. Yes, we need it to be CO2, but we didn't get here overnight. So it's going to take time.
Thank you. Next, Michael Nigro.
Hi, my name is Mike Nigro. I'm a Democrat running in Bennington District 5 for state representative. I have served 1 term previously as state rep from 2021 to 22. And I was first motivated to run for office largely because of the growing divide in American politics. And I see that most clearly on a national level, but in Vermont and in our community as well. And I started thinking that I really wanted to see more careful communicators, people that were thoughtful, people that listened, people that considered different viewpoints, and people that were willing to work with people with whom they disagree. And as I thought that, I decided perhaps this was the moment that I had something to bring to this dialogue and to Vermont. I think I am somebody that listens, works with a wide variety of people. I worked in healthcare for 18 years, and the business world has long recognized that if you hire only like-minded people, you're not going to end up with a strong team. And for some reason, in politics, we view things a little differently. It seems to be very much, you're never supposed to admit that perhaps other people have an idea that's good or have thoughtful reasons behind what they do. So again, this divide is really what motivated me, and continues today to be the strongest motivator for me in running again. Boy, when that time goes up, it just blanks out the rest of your head, so I'll just leave it right there.
Thank you. Will Gear, you're next.
My name's Will Greer, and I'm running for the State House here in Bennington. I graduated from Bennington College, like Cynthia, with my plan focused in public administration. I've worked in public policy in Montpelier and in the land title insurance industry. Currently, I serve as a Justice of the Peace in the town of Bennington and also served on the Community Policing Advisory Review Board. I know that we have great questions tonight, but I just want to emphasize some topics that I hear a lot and that I've been putting my emphasis on with the campaign. I've been focused on criminal justice, working with law enforcement and public safety partners to address crime in our community and the surrounding area. I've worked in Montpelier with public health policy in particular, and I think expanding on legislation such as the reforms with prior authorization this past biennium are crucial steps to putting healthcare back in control of doctors and patients working together, which will reduce premiums and cost here in Vermont. I want to support Vermont businesses because I have not one or two, but 3 parents that own small businesses, and 2 of them did it without a college degree and focused on the trades and were hardworking blue-collar men. But what I saw from an early age, and I just want to emphasize, is how government programs can help people if done right, but also can hurt and burden people. Mainly with unemployment insurance, job placement, training programs, and workforce development. That, to me, is what runs our country, it runs our state, and labor touches us all in some way or another. In terms of gathering information from our constituents, if elected, I think presence is key. I know people have talked about that, going to community events, staying in touch with people and organizations, and meeting with folks in group and individual settings. I know that people have already started emailing, I guess having high hopes that I'm elected. We'll see, we'll wait till November, but the things that they send already are affiliated with education, municipal issues.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Spike. Okay.
Somebody asked me last, right?
Right, this time.
I'm Spike Whitmire. I'm running for state senate here in the Bennington District. If you don't know me, I'm a husband, father, and proud grandfather. I've worked in and around Bennington in the housing industry for most of 30 years. During that time, I've also served the community for over 25 years, feeding and encouraging the poor and disadvantaged right down here in the corner of River and Benmont, to Soup Kitchen. I've started and ran a children's summer camp that took kids from low-income areas in Pownell and Bennington, as well as kids who had a parent incarcerated. We took them to summer camp. I started and ran the teen center. It's down on School Street and Pleasant Street. It's still there and running and active. It's a place where teens can hang out and drink Mountain Dew and have good, clean fun. And I also spent about 10 years volunteering for the Department of Corrections, as well as most recently, I'm currently serving as school board president of a local private school. In the same way I've served the community in this area, I would like to serve the community by bringing their voice back to Montpelier. I've made a commitment to every resident of Bennington District, regardless of their political party, their race, their age, their gender, or anything else, that if elected, there will be no more surprises coming out of Montpelier. Every week, I will promise to post on my website, spikewhitmire.com, what is being debated and what is being scheduled to be voted on. And on that website, people have a chance to respond and tell me what they think about those issues that are going to be happening that week. And based on what response I get from the people about those issues, then I'll be able to go and represent them accurately at the State House before votes are cast, not after. And by doing this, I'm doing this in order to bring transparency to the government and accurately represent the people and effectively relay the voice of the people to the State House.
And thank you. Thank you all for round 1. Round 2 is going to change a bit. This time you have even shorter answer times, only 90 seconds. I know you don't believe you had 2 minutes a while ago, but you did. So our first actual question is on education. In Vermont, the planning and funding of education is split between the local and legislative control. Voters and local government determine the needs, and the legislature has to find the funds, generally by raising taxes. There are options for trimming costs, such as closing or consolidating schools or changing the student-teacher ratio, but these options often cause trauma in the local communities. Do you have any ideas for cost containment and/or changes to the funding process? And how should the decisions be made? By the local community or the legislature? You have 90 seconds for this and all following questions. First up, Steve Barry.
Local communities should determine what they want for their educational system. Part of the problem in Vermont is that the local one-room schools were taken out. They were made consolidated schools. As those consolidated schools grew, so did the budgets, and those little schoolhouses which were shut down, now everyone was bused to someplace else. And then if you want to take a look at the problem with the school system, take a look at how many people are administrators and how few of them are teachers. That is really a major issue for us right now because we can't afford our educational process. It is out of control, so you have to tax your property in order to pay for one-on-ones, et cetera, but that's because we have a huge bloated bureaucracy, and that is not going to go away unless the locals begin to rise up and say, we want to have determination about our school systems rather than having something come from outside and then say, here's the bill for this year. So I would say local is imperative here. The grassroots are what we really need to focus on as we change our school system. I also am for school choice, just to let you know, and I think that's really important. And I also think that homeschooling is really important, and that schools right now should not be places where you're doing anything but teaching civics, responsibility, historical responsibility, reading, writing, mathematics, the sciences.
Thank you. Spike Whitmore, would you like to answer the same question, please?
Sure. To be clear, I want Vermont to have the highest standard of education and every student to graduate with an excellent education. But the truth is Vermont currently spends more per student on education than almost every state in the country, second or third. Yet education, in spite of that, education spending's gone up 13.8% last year, and it's predicted to go up another 10 to 12% next year. That's a 25% increase in just 2 years, and everyday Vermonters cannot afford this type of spending. I would recommend, as Steve said, to also look to consolidate supervisory unions and downsize administrations. Vermont has more staff more administrative staff per student than any state in the country. Get that? More administrative staff per student than any state in the country. We can downsize administrative staff, we can consolidate supervisory unions, and we can save millions of dollars right there and not take $1 away from students or teachers. We can save a lot right there. I propose legislation to limit administrations from proposing budgets that are more than the current year plus inflation. We have to stop the bleeding, and administrations can't propose budgets that are so bloated and have the people vote on them, and then have the state have to pay for it.
Michael Nigro.
Hi. So this is one of these places where we have two opposing truths. It's true that education is one of the most important investments as a state, one of the most important places a community needs to invest, and it's also true that our costs cannot continue to increase the way they have. You know, there are a lot of bigger picture issues that feed into this, things like healthcare costs rising, as well as truthfully having a stagnant population, a stagnant and aging population in southern Vermont. So it also is not helpful for our school systems to have a reducing number of students. So I think economic development, some of the big picture goals for the state are important. But I don't disagree. I think Seth had talked about the idea of blowing up the system. It's a very complex funding system, and in fact, when I speak to voters, I would say your average Vermonter has no understanding of our system whatsoever, and I think that's not a good place to start. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Tim Corcoran.
Try to talk fast here. $2.4 billion obviously is not sustainable and needs to be addressed. And what we did as a legislature is we set up a commission toward the state of Vermont and sit down with local communities, which I think are coming here there. So,
So they're going to have a commission, they're going to come back with recommendations to the state and give us an outline what the recommendations should be. But personally, among those recommendations, I think personally, the vote that a town takes should be closely tied to their tax rate that they're going to get. Because when we voted in March here in Bennington, it was closer to 12 to 13%, and we got a 5.2%. Is that fair? Maybe if you're in Bennington, but in other towns, it's not so fair. We can look at things that we can take out of the education fund and put it in the general fund and sort of purify it and make it surely it's general fund money. And then we should set parameters around the ed fund and say, hey, this is the town, what the state is willing to pay. And if you want to go above and beyond that, then that's your responsibility. But there's no doubt that we're on the wrong track and it needs to be addressed. We are going to address it. People can make light of all the studies that we have done, but there's no doubt that action will be taken. And there's going to be tough decisions. You're going to have winners and you're going to have losers.
Thank you.
I got the red flag.
Thank you. Mary Morrissey.
Yes, when I first went into the legislature was the year of Act 60, and I assure you it was not at that time an easy vote. There was no cost containment within the bill itself, and like has been said, there wasn't a great understanding for the citizens, or I believe for a lot of the legislators. It was a hard piece of legislation to get your arms around. I would like to see us peel back and start at the ground level to really see what our communities need. We are one of the top spending for education for our children in the country, and yet our population and students are going down. And again, many of our schools across the state are not meeting basic standards. So we've got to turn this around, that we are providing a very good education for our students. The other piece of it is we've got health care and other pieces within the budget that go right through the roof. And like Mike said, if I can just finish this last, those are costs that just will continue to rise, and it has nothing to do with education.
Thank you. Tim Corcoran.
I can go.
Oh, sorry. Oh, we messed this up. Okay. Will Gear.
There we go. Okay. Don't worry, I'll do it. No, I got it. We need to make sure that our schools are funded through a reliable revenue source. Making sure that our property tax revenue is stable has to be the first step in Vermont to addressing that. We've talked about this now, about the legislature's role in approving those budgets. We need to flip that. The legislature takes all those budgets and then appropriates the money. What the legislature needs to do is close the gap of responsibility and accountability with local districts and not let them run the bottomless pit that some of them are. And what they need to say is, this is what we have, this is the revenue we're raising, this is the per pupil spending range that we're going to allow districts to do, work with it and make it work. Bennington would not be affected by that because we hit that per pupil spending range usually on average. But if a school district overspends, we revert back to the standard practice of penalizing excessive spending. And as people have said, we are the second highest per pupil spending of any state, and we have the lowest staff to student ratio in the country. And the Digger did talk about the other day that $500 million gets appropriated but is not properly spent. That's a fifth of the budget right there. We should be looking at how we're spending the money we already have and make sure we're allocating it to the resources that we want to work and that are going to work best for our kids. And I finished with time, so I'm good.
Thank you. Jim Carroll.
Thank you. The thing that I've been wrestling with.
Microphone.
Thank you. The thing that I've been wrestling with is, you know, the town of Bennington School Board did a great job. There was a 5% increase. Other places in the state, up north, 13, 14% increase. Now, what I'm suggesting is that there is some uniformity that can be applied throughout the state. I mean, to have that kind of disparity just beggars the question of how. Another tough consideration that many communities don't want to take into account is consolidation, to cut down on administration and the cost of heating one or more and providing whatever energy needs there are for those buildings locally. That's really the best I can offer.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anthony Cook.
Looking at it from an economics perspective, the student ratio is 4.4, the staff ratio, per students. That is the highest in the country, and that is also like around 80% of the education costs. So it's something you can't ignore. Our teacher ratio is around 10% per student, and that's the highest in the nation. And it's nice that we have the teachers with so few students, because technically they can spend more time with the students, but the statistics show that it doesn't do that much. The national average is class size, I do believe, is around 16%. So we got room to grow there. But I think the people with 13.8% tax increase, the people got to rise up. There has to be a change. There has to be pressure on the school board level, and then the school board level has to put pressure on administration, and there's a bulwark of administration that has to be changed in this state. And I guess I'll stop right here.
Thank you. Cynthia Browning.
Okay, so as I said in the beginning, the high education property taxes is one of the main reasons I'm running. As I also said then, one of the problems we have is what's being paid for in the education fund. The founding legislation says it can only go for education, but other programs are in there. The state moved programs that used to be paid for in the general fund, and they're now paid for in the education fund. That's wrong. wrong. It has to stop. It could stop in the next session without waiting for the commission's recommendations. So that's what I will definitely be pushing for, because it's wrong. But there's a lot of tension in the education fund. There's the local votes, there's the state, but the state has most of the power. A statewide body sets teacher health care insurance. It sets teacher compensation. And all the locals can do is decide how many teachers they're going to have. They don't negotiate contracts anymore. So the local boards have really lost a lot of power, and the state has a lot of power. And I think that needs to be redressed. I think people need to understand the system better and be connected to the consequences of their vote. And the only way that's going to happen, as others have said, is to have a simpler, more straightforward system. But in order to do that, you have to elect people who understand the current system and can understand the recommended changes and can understand avoiding unintended consequences.
Thank you very much. Seth Bongartz.
I'll start by saying very quickly, I think the solution to this is a block grant system. Is a block grant system where we set a rate for primary residential property, we set a rate for non-primary residential property, all goes into this big pot and the stink is distributed back down to communities on a per pupil, weighted per pupil basis, and that's then where the decisions, the tough decisions are going to have to be made about whether in order to use that money efficiently you consolidate schools or some of the things that you have to do. I have spent a large part of my summer going around and visiting schools all over the district, from Wilmington to the elementary school to the high school to Dorset School, both the high school and the middle school here in Bennington, and spending an hour each time with the principals and really understanding what's going on in those schools and understanding the struggles that they are faced with and the way that they're trying to provide middle-class opportunities for kids often living in poverty, actually often living in their cars. And so I think we do need a system where somebody's in control. Right now under this system, you sort of had this intimated to you. Really, it's almost ingenious in that nobody's actually in control. And we need to have a system where the buck stops, and I think it's on one level with the legislature for setting the block grant rate and sending it down, and then the towns, districts are going to have to make the decisions about how to spend that, and I think we're going to give them a lot of flexibility, give a lot of authority to principals and local school boards and let them make the decisions, and I'm out of time.
Thank you very much. Rob Plunkett.
And one of the things that's interesting about coming towards the end is that the other folks have said all of the things that you were thinking about. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact here because the question, it can't be answered in 90 seconds. And quite literally, there are studies. We can't go through the spreadsheet, and there's literally a spreadsheet in one of them that we have now. But what I do want to say is that I'm proud of our schools. Our schools are actually quite good. And I'm proud of our teachers. I'm proud of our administrators. I was on the school board, and these folks are diligent, and they work, and they want to educate our children. And so when we're talking about cutting spending, I want to make sure that what's clear is that we're not taking the teachers to task. We're not taking the principals to task on this. But we do have to change the system. And one of the things I keep coming back to with all of these really complex issues is something I heard very early on, just when I had first started, when I was first telling folks that I was running, and I didn't even know a week before, is that the middle class is being squeezed. And so when we're talking about this, we really have to think about who is it that's going to be paying and who is going to be squeezed by this. And having that deep in our mind, as we're having these discussions that take a lot longer than 90 seconds, we have to keep that in mind, is who it is that's going to be paid and who is going to be under the burden of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Joe Gervais.
Well, I could just say what they said. One of the things that wasn't addressed is right now we've basically got a blank check system for funding the schools. There's so much of a shell game going on of how the funding actually happens that nobody actually understands the formula to fund the schools. And we've had these study after study, and they're stacked with special interests. You've got the Vermont NEA as a major part of it, the principals union, the supervisories union. Are those the right people to be making the decisions, particularly when we want to be constraining the spending that's being done and controlling the spending? As I talk to people, one of the questions that gets asked is, why are we taxing unrealized gains in the state? Our property values go up, and our property assessment, our tax rate goes up right along with it. So you get a lot of retirees that we've seen over the last few years, property values have gone up, and their property tax bills are getting to a point where they're unaffordable. Vermont is one of 4 states that does not have a cap on property taxes, and such a cap would force spending cuts. It would put a limit on how much the spending could actually expand. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Now moving on to the next topic, which is climate resilience. Vermont's Climate Action Plan notes that our dependence on fossil fuels leads to high and unpredictable energy costs. The Affordable Heating Act, Act 18, aims to help Vermonters save money by switching to clean heat. But it is a controversial bill and, frankly, not very easy to understand. What is your position on Act 18? And as simply as possible, which we know this is asking a lot of you, why is it or isn't it a constructive step in improving our climate resilience? Anthony Cook.
Okay. Act 18, basically, I'm going to be straight up and honest with you, that's a horrible bill. And then I'm going to tell you why, is because what it does is basically what it does is more successful this bill is, the more expensive it's going to be. So like, for example, if you voted for this bill and you say it's not going to be expensive, and then you don't want the bill to succeed, because as more people use these credits to, for different things like home heating pumps and home heating water and weatherization, the more it's going to cost. The reason why we have Act 18 is because of the Global Warming Solution Act, which was passed in 2020 under the governor's veto. And what that does is it has a mandate that says, it's a legal mandate that the state can be sued if we don't meet certain benchmarks by 230, 235, 250, we can actually be sued. And that act, the Global Warming Solutions Act, those have to be not mandates, but goals. And the provision to sue needs to be taken out.
Thank you. Joe Gervais.
Like Anthony was saying, with Act 53 in 2020, we set specific mandates. They've got to be met. To meet those mandates in the thermal sector, it's 120,000 homes to weatherize by 2030, 177,000 homes put heat pumps in, 136,000 homes to update their water heaters, 14,992 to move to advanced wood systems, and another 21,086 homes to put on biofuel. That's expensive. That's $3.3 billion in the next 5 years. And I've heard some legislators in this district say, oh, that'll only cost $0.05 a gallon. No. And because it's mandates, we've got to do it. I think we've got to do something that's more sensible according to what we can afford, turn these into goals, and move aggressively towards these goals at rates we can afford. The bill was touted as being affordable. Electricity is more expensive to heat with than these other fuels. And the low-income population that was supposed to get 16% of the benefit of these clean heat credits, at best, the recent study says 12%. So only 75% of them will take benefit. There's another 25% of the low income that don't get the benefit of these programs. And frequently, these are the households that are in mobile homes and other things that can't take advantage of some of these changes to heat pumps and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Carroll.
Thank you. I meant to say in the last question, and with respect to any of these questions, there are no simple solutions. If there were, we would have done them. They would have been done. Now, with respect to the clean heat standard, you know, the Koch brothers have poured out millions of dollars into scaring Vermonters that, you know, the heating prices are going to go through the roof and make it even more unaffordable here. Nothing has been done. No vote has been taken. The only thing that we have planned for this coming legislative session is to look at what the cost of building that infrastructure could possibly be. Now, if it turns out that it is some ungodly amount of money, of course not, we're not going to vote for it. I mean, that's just crazy. But we have to examine what we can do within that framework. And on a global level, with respect to, you know, Vermont's tiny impact on carbon emissions, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that should be irrelevant. Cumulatively, we have to act together if we're serious about protecting our children's future.
Thank you. Will, Gary.
So I think that when we talk about environmental policy, we have to make sure that we're talking about land protection, we're talking about our water, and we're talking about our air. When it comes to, and Jim actually put that very eloquently about how Vermont is small, I think that there's two things we have to think about. Every action does add up, but we also can't legislate out of fear and, expect to put a heavy burden and a price on Vermonters to do some of these things. And I'll just relate it to the two major bills that came in on environmental and energy policy in the last biennium, and I'm sure there will be continuing work on it in this coming session. The Renewable Energy Standard and the Clean Heat Standard, the Affordable Heat Act. The Renewable Energy Standard, it changes the way that municipalities and electric utilities have to fund to get renewable in-state resources. And I think that, that would have been something I would have supported. Now, when it comes to the Affordable Heat Act, I most likely would not have supported that, mainly because we have to have the renewable energy standard and actually have a fully renewable grid before we have any real impact on switching over if we end up doing part of that or all of it over the long term. Because there's no difference in a combustion in your home's oil furnace or whether it's being combusted down at an oil power plant out of state. So that's why I wouldn't have supported that bill in particular. But now that it is law, I think it's worth considering the points that it may add short-term and long-term value to Vermont.
Thank you very much. Tim Corcoran.
Yes, the Clean Heat Standard, obviously, no doubt it was a tough bill, but this goes back to my original comments where people are so quick to say no for the sake of saying no. And my mind thought going into this is saying, hey, let's take a look at it. This could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, or it could be a piece of you-know-what. And those numbers are starting to come out, and we're getting a clear picture of what this is going to cost. And the initial estimates are $10 billion and potentially adding $1.78 up to $4 per gallon on your oil bill. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'll speak for everybody. I don't think too many people are going to go along with that. But we needed to do something. We needed to say, hey, climate is a serious issue. We need to tackle it. And if that's not the answer, then we go back to, smaller investments, buying more electrical buses and EV cars, taking another crack at the bottle bill. We passed S213, the Flood Safety Mitigation Act, to look at our river corridors and dams, so when we do have floods, they're manageable. And when we do our roadways, our infrastructure can handle the extra water. So there are things that we could do outside of the Clean Heat Standard, but as of now, I don't see too many people supporting that. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Seth Bunkarts.
Thank you. There's a big transition already happening. People who can afford the upfront costs are switching from oil to solar and better insulation of their house and other systems that are not subject to the large oil spikes in oil prices that we saw at the beginning of COVID, and given where the Middle East is right now, we could see again. So what is happening now is that people who can afford it are switching to less expensive, more stable platforms, more stable energy sources. And what this bill is about is trying to make that possible for low and moderate income Vermonters. So what the legislature did was kind of stand up a proposition about how it might happen, and then in a way that I've never seen the legislature do before is to do a really very comprehensive analysis as to the strengths and weaknesses of that proposal, even to the point of saying that we're going to review the rules before they're implemented by the Public Utility Commission, something we've never done before. And so what we're really trying to do, and the question is, how do we get it right? There's no question that if we can move to a more stable regional, in-state or regional system that involves like offshore wind, solar, we're going to have a much more stable platform for energy, and it's going to be much more affordable. The question is getting there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Michael Nigro.
I think, like other folks, I have concerns about the costs here, and certainly in talking with voters, right now affordability is a topic that seems to come up in many of the conversations I have. So certainly, I think if the costs are high, I agree with some other folks here that I don't think I would support something that's going to add incredible costs, and I think a lot of other folks won't either. I will make one other note, which is there are some things that I believe are the right decision that I also think belong in a federal realm rather than the state role. And I sometimes worry that broad policies focused on reducing carbon emissions that other states maybe aren't engaged in sometimes worry me about how they could affect Vermont's cost versus other states. So again, I think the goals overall I support, but I think it's going to come down to cost, and I'd support this more in a national level than simply in Vermont.
Thank you. Steve Berry.
I think that the goals are admirable. I think if you can afford them. But I think that there are too many people that I deal with on a regular basis. And where I started in the Northeast Kingdom back 50 years ago, they certainly can't afford it. They use wood heat. They can't afford the oil. They can't afford a lot of things. But, so the Global Warming Solutions Act, H74, I think needs to be repealed. I think that we should try to reduce CO2, but we don't need a mandate for it. I think that H73, the California Clean Air Act, needs to be revoked. I think that basically you need to take a look at where does this come from. Is this really a solution that came from Vermonters? Did Vermonters really push for this to happen, or is there something else that is taking place nationally, maybe even globally, that wants us to sort of change the way we think about local? And maybe we don't even understand the degree to which there are other factors that are involved, and there's a trickle-down type of essence that's happening here. There are faceless people that we will never know about who have a lot of agendas, and those agendas are playing out, and that's why it's really important for us on the local level to be much more conscientious in terms of what we need in our own state, and for the local people to gather in town meeting, et cetera, and to make the determinations about how we're going to be trying to meet the requirements of the state, but also be good citizens is important.
Thank you. Spike Whitmire.
So on May 13th of last year, our legislators voted to enact Act 18. The very first paragraph of Act 18 says this, and you can read it if you want to look it up. It says Act 18 is an act relating to affordability affordably meeting the mandated greenhouse gas reductions for the thermal sector through efficiency, weatherization measures, electrifications, and decarbonization. It says S5, it is hereby enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Vermont. So our legislators basically locked us into a mandate and didn't bother to do the simple math of calculating how much it would cost us. You can say, why would that happen? Well, there's lots of theories. My personal opinion is they probably didn't want the general public to know what it was going to cost till after the elections, because this mandate, if you do the simple math, is going to cost billions of dollars, and it's going to cost, and if it's going to be passed on to the general public every time they buy a gallon of oil, it's not a credit, it's not anything else, but as we all know, that costs get passed on to the consumer, and this, as some of the other people have mentioned, this is going to cost Vermonters a ton of money, and it's going to make our houses so a lot of average Vermonters can't affordably heat their houses, and it's just not acceptable. Who buys a car without first checking to see how much that car costs?
Thank you.
And that's exactly what our legislators did.
Thank you very much. Rob Plunkett?
So the question was specifically about Act 18 and the unfortunate position of someone turning off my mic, probably me, and also being at the end of this question. So I'm heartened a little bit about the discussion that we've had. I'm looking forward to having this discussion in the legislature, because that's what the bill is. That's what the act was, is to further the discussion along. One of the things I've been saying about this entire process from a number of different acts over, I think it's 4 years, is that this is how I want my legislature to pass law, to do it slowly, but with a specific goal in mind, and with something at the end that we're hoping to accomplish. And I'm a lawyer. I'm not afraid of lawsuits, but when we're talking about lawsuits, what that means is a lawsuit to make the government do what it's supposed to do. It's an act, or it's a Rule 75, but that's a whole lawyer thing. It's not something where it's going to be Vermont's costing even more because of that, except maybe attorney's fees. But separately from that, I look at what we had with Act 18, and it was really sort of this is what we want to do. We want a solution. We want to make a market solution for it rather than just a tax solution. And I am in favor of looking towards market solutions for these goals.
Thank you. Mary Morrissey.
Yes, I am one of the legislators that voted no on Act 18, and it's not because I'm against the environment. I truly am. Vermont is, I believe, first or second in the country with having the least carbon emissions. Can we do better? Absolutely, and our goals should go that direction to meet more carbon emission goals. But to have a piece of legislation of this magnitude and not to have the financial pieces go along with it as we were discussing it, you vote in language but don't know the cost of it. And now the devil is in the details. We're seeing exactly what some of the costs are. Now, they talked about within the legislation, anyone in the country can sue the state of Vermont, and the taxpayers will be paying for those lawsuits. We actually have a lawsuit right now in the state of Vermont against this that we haven't been meeting our goals by, I believe, the Law Foundation. I don't think that's where our tax dollar money should be going, to be fighting lawsuits from people not even within our state. I don't know, possible 90 seconds, sorry.
Thank you. Last one, but not least, Cynthia.
Thank you. I certainly support the goals of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and making the transition off of fossil fuels, but I think we have to do it in a balanced, pragmatic way. I think that we've been very successful increasing our efficiency, conserving energy, insulating homes, making a transition towards more electric vehicles, and I think we need to take everything we have, every government program needs to be going in that direction. If there's federal infrastructure bill money that's coming down, I think some of it should go towards programs that help the working poor and the low income get insulated homes and get into situations where they can't afford to be warm. The bill we're talking about proposed this market for credits, and the Public Utility Commission, which was charged with studying it, has just come out and said Vermont's too small to make this work. It's hard to make an artificial market, and that's what you're trying to do. I don't know that we need a new program here. I think we need to go back to basics and put all our energy and all our resources into the efficiency, conservation, and renewables drives across all state government and all programs, the housing, the transportation, everywhere. We've already done that to a good extent, and we've made a lot of progress, and I think we need to keep doing that and not try to develop big new programs that may not work and may in themselves be expensive.
Thank you. Next question. Housing. Vermont is facing a critical housing shortage. An estimated 3,458 people are unhoused in our state, a 300% increase since 2020. The population faces many barriers: low or no income, no landlord references, no credit, drug addiction in some instances, and many more. At the same time, businesses are unable to hire and keep new employees because of the shortage of affordable housing. Workers who are seeking jobs in Vermont are often unable to find a place to live that is both decent and affordable. They often resort to living at a distance and facing a long commute or turning down the job. What do you envision that could alleviate this ongoing housing crisis? Michael Nigro.
So, first of all, let me say that I think the legislature has been on the right track with some of the work they've done trying to make it easier to develop in downtowns and town centers. That said, I still speak with developers that say that Act 250 is an impediment to being able to build and to develop. Obviously, that is something that the legislature has been nibbling on for years and has not been easy to fix. I do think there are some simple things that the state can do to encourage and to help businesses and private and Vermonters address some of this themselves. I'm a big fan of the VHIP program, Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which gives grants. In fact, my wife and I received one of these and were able to rehabilitate a dilapidated apartment, something that without the grant would have taken us 4 and 5 years, and we were able to do so. I mean, we were able to do it in like 6 months. And that sort of thing, again, kind of a public-private partnership sort of approach to encouraging businesses and Vermonters in developing themselves.
Thank you. Tim Corcoran.
Yeah, I mean, we're roughly 70,000 units over 10 years that we need to, make up. And, what has the legislature done? We invested over, I think, roughly $1 billion, over the last 3 or 4 years. And that's been spread across the spectrum. If you look at what we've given towards, emergency housing, that's been $88 million. Housing construction and rehab, there's another $79 million. Short-term transitional, there's another $3.3 million. So we are pumping money, but we know for a fact that we can't buy our way out of this. You know, there needs to be regulations, like the great work that Seth has done with H287, and it sets up different tiers for certain towns depending on the size, and Bennington shall most likely get a tier 1, and that will allow towns to be exempt from certain Act 250 criteria. So if that's going to speed up the problems, it's not going to be the end-all, be-all, but that's another thing that that we're working towards to solve this problem. And then there was years ago, and I'm not sure if it was at a Commerce Committee, but we set up a first-time home buyers, to help them with their down payment of $5,000. So we are doing bits and pieces to try to help this, but we didn't get into this overnight, and we're not going to get at it overnight. But we are making, I think, great strides towards addressing the housing crisis, and my red flag is up.
Thank you.
It's just
Mary Morrissey.
The Act 250 has been a problem for building new housing. I think it's also very important for communities to really have an understanding of the kind of housing that they need, whether it's for low income, whether it's workforce housing, whether it's for first-time, homeowners, whether, and so that we have an estimate. We just say, at times I'll hear these large numbers, we need 400 new apartments, but what is it that we're really needing? I believe that, as Tim had indicated, we have made some strides, but it concerns me that even in the last couple of years since COVID, the state's spent several $100 million on the hotel motel vouchers. We should have, and really at the end of the day, nothing to show for it. I would have preferred that we were able to house people in a different way during that time, where we were creating long-term solutions and not just going through money. So we need to be more careful about how we're going forward with spending money.
Cynthia.
Thank you. So the way I see the housing issue is there's the long run and there's the short run. It takes time to build new houses and apartments, and in the long run, that's what we're going to need. We're down because after the Great Recession in 2009, contractors really cut back because that really affected them when the housing prices crashed. It's hard to believe that happened, but it did. So we're behind. We have to keep building specifically workforce housing and apartments, but not everybody's going to be able to afford a house. So in the long run, we need more housing stock, there's no doubt. But in the short run, what can we do? I really like the question of public-private partnerships with some of the nonprofits. I've heard of nonprofits who will actually buy a motel and provide services to the people who stay there, and then help them transition out into an apartment in the community. Services are really important for people struggling with homelessness. So I really like that model, and I really think that we have to increase the density of use. Some of the housing support programs, I think, gives people incentives to have just one person in the apartment or one person in the house. They might lose their support if other people move in, something like that. So I think we need to look at some of those support programs. I think we need to look at state office buildings and vacant schools and get creative in terms of reusing those structures more quickly than we have in the past. Thank you.
Steve Berry.
This is an affordability issue from my perspective. If you can't afford to live in Vermont, you cannot afford to live in Vermont on $13.67 for a minimum wage. It costs you $23 plus to live in Vermont. So how can you afford a house or even rent an apartment on $13.67 in minimum wage? The biggest issue for the legislature is really bringing it up to a livable wage. If you had $25 per hour for a Vermonter, they could live in this state. You could pay for your oil. You could do all these things that you can't do right now, and that's because we have made the state unaffordable, and nobody wants to tackle bringing up the amount of money that you make to a livable wage. A person's working at AT&T, $13.67, and that company and 250 others are run by a guy who lives in Saudi Arabia who is bragging he didn't pay any taxes to the United States of America. $5 billion he made, but this kid has to make $13.67, and he can't afford to live in Vermont. So it's an affordability issue. Bring the livable wage so that Vermonters can actually live here. My grandchildren can be here. My children can be here. Otherwise, they'll leave.
Thank you. Spike, the mayor.
Well, to make housing affordable, we need to obviously add more housing. There's just not enough. High demand creates high costs when we go to purchase our houses. So we need to encourage growth, and by doing this, we could, while being environmentally sensitive, we need to eliminate needless regulations that discourage investors from investing in our communities. And we need to work to recognize potential growth areas based on need, development potential, environmental impact, and encourage developers to invest in these particular areas, maybe with tax breaks and other incentives to encourage growth. And the other thing we can briefly do before I run out of time is we need a tax cap. When our property taxes go up, the amount of homes, the amount of money that someone can borrow goes down because that tax is figured into their debt income ratio when they go to qualify for a loan. And so when taxes go up, the amount of money you qualify goes down, and that's just pushing a lot of first-time home buyers right out of the market.
Thank you. Rob Plunkett.
I'm on. So my background is criminal law. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a developer. I'm not an economist. And so this is one of the many things over the past few months that I've been trying to get my head around, to actually learn a little bit about what has been happening, how did we get here. And I don't have an answer for how do we get here, but I did see what the legislature has been doing, and I expect Seth will go fairly into detail with this. But essentially, there are two things that the legislature can do. One is to reduce the regulations to increase the ability of developers to create housing, and that's what's being done. The other is provide subsidies, which there had been some discussions on that, but it didn't go as far as it could have. So we're going to have to continue to have those discussions, and I'm looking forward to that. But one thing that I definitely want to do is for everybody, not just the legislature, but everybody, to listen to the developers who come up with ideas. They will think about what it is that could be done, and they might even have a market study that's all set to do it. So listening to them and trying to follow through with their plans is something that I encourage everyone to do, and I plan to do in the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Greer.
Yeah. So we've talked about property taxes, and we've talked about the demand and the supply of the housing market, but I think that it is a huge deterrent for people to want to build here and to want to move here when we do have an unstable property tax system that you don't know what the rate change is going to be like, making sure it's predictable and steady, but also we have a shrinking and aging workforce, and I know that ties into housing. If we don't, we need to make sure that people are able to move here and also be able to live here that already are here. But the private market can meet the demands if there's that economic incentive, and the state can encourage development of some kinds. That's why, and I was going to highlight Representative Bongart's, I think as many of us have done, on those Act 250 reforms that help lower the barriers, make the permitting process easier, and also puts that development in the downtown areas and our city centers and really putting it where we want it to be. Another component, and this is just something personal about the property taxes that, was passed in the last biennium, but I think we don't talk about enough, was the common level of appraisal that does make those property tax triggers swing so much, and there's so much variety in it. Now, the legislature's changed that. They've fallen back on a system where it's now a regularly scheduled appraisal system, but what it still does not do is address that drastic swing that we're seeing, and it also doesn't capture the housing market that we are seeing across Vermont, but definitely supporting new housing development projects. I know Tim was wanting to talk about those public-private partnerships, so I'll comment on that for him since he ran out of time. And then also the credits that, could potentially promote reconfiguration of housing. I heard that we were talking about that over here. Accessory dwelling units. Someone might have a home that they're trying to retrofit so that they can make it rentable or, be able to put it on the market.
Thank you, Will.
Those are things. Okay, my time's up. Awesome.
Joe Gervais.
Some have talked about the regulation. I looked at getting rentals when my wife and I first moved back here back in 2013, and my lawyer says, you don't want to be a landlord in this state. And as I talk to those that are landlords, the regulations are really favoring the tenant to the point that many just don't want to make housing available for rental. That's something we should address to get more rentals. Why are so many people doing short-term rentals? Because it's easier for them. So can we swing that needle back to more long-term rentals? On the development side, I know a kid trying to build a house here in Bennington. It's going to cost him $500 a square foot to build a 700 square foot apartment over a garage. Why is that? Energy code, septic requirements, all this legislation here that's driving up the actual cost of building. We need to simplify that and reduce that. There's opportunity here, and I talk to developers every day being in the sawmill business. Act 250 is a noose around their neck. They can only build, with this new reform, it's easy for 5% of the state. The other 95% of the state is even more difficult with this new reform. So we need to look at simplifying Act 250.
Thank you. Jim Carroll.
Thank you. It was a segment on NPR this week, and it sounds totally counterintuitive, but the reason they talked about the reason for homelessness is a lack of housing. Sounds counterintuitive, but with the rents, as the gentleman at the end of the table mentioned, they're priced out of it. There's a woman here in Bennington, works 3 jobs, and she's living in her car. I mean, it's just crazy. I work primarily up in the Stratton Mountain area, Manchester, et cetera. And there are homes up there. The one place that I just finished up, 8 bedrooms. It's just an enormous house. It sits empty 11 months out of the year. And I would like to see us develop in the legislature some kind of incentive for those property owners to either convert them into rental properties or sell them with a premium from the state. And one of the benefits to an idea like this is the houses are already there. There's no Act 250 involved, and for all intents and purposes, a new community is started without putting a shovel in the ground. It's just, yeah.
Thank you. Seth.
Thank you. So we can't control the costs of labor. We can't control the costs of building materials. There's a couple of things we can do. One of them is that we can look carefully at the regulatory structure and make it easier for developers of housing to build housing. And we've done a number of things in that area in the last 4 years. We've really attacked, and by the way, most housing developers will tell you the issue isn't Act 250. The issue is local zoning. And and we have focused a lot on disallowing exclusionary zoning practices. We've required that towns with municipal sewer and water allow at least up to 5 units an acre in those areas. We've said that duplexes, anywhere you can build a single-family home in the state of Vermont, you can build a duplex, and that's a huge that's a huge step in the right direction. Makes duplexes available anywhere. We've said the same thing to any single-family home anywhere it can have an ADU, and we've also said in this most recent legislation that if you're in an area with sewer and water, the town must allow you to go up at least 4 stories, and if you have an affordable housing level, you get a 5th story, because it's a lot less expensive to go up than it is to build foundation after foundation and roof after roof. One foundation, one roof. So we've done a lot there, and we've through the regulatory process, we have also, for the first time in the history of Act 250, we have in some areas actually eliminated Act 250 jurisdiction if the towns are in a position to do it well themselves. So we've put about $1 billion into out of time. Okay.
Thank you. And Anthony Cook, you have a final word on this.
Okay. Our housing boom is really part of a bigger problem. What we need is our housing crisis, I should call it. What we need is an economic boom. We need a construction boom. And we haven't had that for quite a while now. In order to do that, the first thing we got to do is first interest rates federally have to come down. But number 2 is property taxes. We got to have reasonable property taxes in this state. Our people are not going to invest. And number 3 is the biggest, is the various codes and regulations that building contractors have to face, and sometimes it's from the local, it's local, and sometimes it's state. But one thing I want to do is the building contractors, they have my phone number, because I want to work to reduce the regulations, because we really need this economic boom, and it's not just housing. So you get the housing, you get an economic boom, you get everything.
Thank you. Now, this next question, our last question, and if we have time, which we might, we'll take a few from the audience as well. But this question is not specifically about an issue. This is about your term in office and where you see yourself in the future. So the question is, if at some point in the future you were to look back on your time in office, what would tell you that you've been successful? And the first question goes to Seth Bongartz.
Looking back, I would hope that I would feel like I changed people's lives or had an influence on people's lives for the better. I think that's what, and I think everybody would probably say that. So in terms of what I have been doing in the legislature, I have made, in the last 4 years, a major impact on the regulatory apparatus as it relates to housing, and I've made a major impact on Vermont's environment, and as it relates to forests, stream protection, river corridors, and actually doing some of the things that we need to do to make ourselves more climate resilient. One of the things we need to do, speaking of climate resiliency, is stop making it worse. And we need to stop cutting forests in the wrong place, in haphazard ways, and because forests are attenuators of floods, and we need to let rivers meander the way that they need to meander. We need to, and so we need to stop building in areas that we shouldn't be building, that actually constrict rivers and make flooding worse downstream. So we've done some of those. We've done some of those things. Actually, we've done them quite well, and I think I've also been able to help people change lives, I hope, because I've really made a difference in getting housing in the pipeline.
Thank you. Will?
think mine's going to be the shortest, because I think that to conclude this, I thought it would be nice to make it short and brief, but I know that we'll be successful with the work that any of us, if we're elected, achieve. I think when it's clear that we have good leaders in office, that we're headed in the right direction, and that things are really looking up in Vermont and in our country, and we won't know that, unfortunately, only time will tell us, but hopefully it's sooner rather than later. And for me, at least, I know my end goal is not to do politics forever, it's to raise a family. So, one day when I look back at that, I hope that I finish it on a mark when time's right.
Thank you. Rob?
So those of you who don't know, we weren't actually given the questions beforehand, but we were given the themes on the opening and the closing, and so we got this closing theme, and this is my favorite thing to think about, because how am I going to know that I was effective 2 years from now or more? Things went through my mind. One is maybe the racetrack in Pownell will finally have something done to it, or perhaps something on a less happy note, that will go a year without someone I prosecuted dying of an overdose. And I just learned of another one today. Some other things I thought, well, maybe if folks in Wilmington thought that I was effective, that would be good, because they're way out there and I don't know them. And if they thought that I was successful, then that would be good. But what really came to mind, and something I haven't really brought into the campaign at all, and it was something actually Bill had mentioned that I should talk about more, is my kids. Is that if my kids say to me sometime later on, Dad, I was proud of you for doing that, that's how I'll know. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob Plunkett.
I get to go.
I'm sorry. I have a stutter. Anthony Cook.
Okay, how would I know? Well, I'm trying to be a representative of the people. When the people will tell me that I did a good job, I've done a good job, it doesn't matter what my pride thinks or what I think, whether I did a good job, it's what the people think, and I'll end it there.
Thank you. Joe Gervais.
This is a fun question, and I missed the note on it, so I'm winging it. When I was in the missions field, the thing that excited me there was when I left, they didn't miss me. I raised up nationals, and they took over the work, and they continued on without me. And in the legislature, we need to get back to the citizen legislature. Right now, a lot of people are serving long terms, and you don't have the farmer coming in for a term or two and then going back and doing his thing. And I think we need to go back to that and get more civic engagement. So for me, part of it is that the next generation is there to serve, that I've helped coach them and raise them up, so that we've got others in the pipeline to bring fresh ears in and fresh voices in to represent us. So that would be how I would look at it and look back at it, to say that the coaching that I did and the team building I did was effective.
Thank you. Jim Carroll.
Thanks. I think for me, it's simple. The passage of a consequential piece of legislation, and I'm proud to be a part of the Commerce Committee, and the bill that we almost got through was on data privacy. And what I learned during the last session is that unscrupulous third parties are coming in and they're selling all the information about you. They're focused on manipulating pre-adolescent and adolescent kids, specifically young girls, to the point where we saw a graph that showed young children, boys and girls, and the incidence of suicidal ideation or action. And it remained pretty steady for both, with slight up and down with boys, but then at around 13 with girls, it was vertical. And it's these places, or these sites like TikTok and other places, they cater to young girls insecurities and endless scrolling and just feeling insecure about themselves. And frankly, having these businesses who really, they don't give a damn about you. Their bottom line is their bottom line.
Thank you. Spike Whitmer.
I have two sons. One's 25 and one's 17. I have two of the world's most beautiful grandbabies. One turned 4 today, Leah, and our other one is Araya. She's 3. And I was thinking about what will make my time in Senate successful. Well, I think of 10 years from now, if I look and I see my sons were able to live in Vermont like I have and carve out a life and be successful. If in 20 years my 2 grandbabies grow up and if they love Vermont like I do, and if they inherit an economic environment that puts them in a position to succeed, if they are able to go outside and see a Vermont that's just as beautiful as it is today, if they're able, if we as a society crack down on crime and bring it under control, so they're able to walk down Main Street and not live in fear, that's what I'll consider success in my state of Senate.
Thank you. Michael Nigro.
It often takes time to recognize whether or not specific legislation was successful. I know that for the term that I did serve, I look back at specific things that I was able to make an imprint on, and to specific, small sometimes things that I say that happened because of me in committee, and that was something I brought up. It's a unique role in a way. People asked me when I was serving how hard it is, how much you have to work as a state representative, and the truth is you work as hard or as little as you choose to. And I have always felt that I'm a hard worker, and I take pride in that. And I think there's nothing more than I would ask that after my time in the legislature, people say, he worked hard at that.
Thank you. Mary Morrissey.
I would have to say that I think at the end of the day, in the time I've been in Montpelier, I have tried to listen and to work with people on all sides of an issue. On a regular basis, and it's extremely humbling when I have citizens that come up and say, will make comments to me. It's about working for the people. And there's not always easy answers when you're serving in the legislature. You can be looking at a piece of legislation. All 12 of us here would probably look at pieces of legislation very differently. But when you try to always keep in mind the people back home that you're representing, that is a key piece, for me at least, that I've tried to listen, I've tried to find a balance in the discussion. So I think it does come from the citizens approaching you and talking about issues, but also at the end of the day when they've said, we appreciate what you've done. And I humbly have heard that often, and I'm...
Thank you. Tim Corcoran.
I guess I'll just add, a lot of stuff has been said. As long as you're truly trying to
Mike.
move that needle in the right direction, people, honestly respect that. If you're doing your best to get the most vulnerable out of that poverty and getting me in a nice situation, that's obviously a success. Trying to help people that are addicted to drugs, trying to, save a life. that's a win. You know, and those things take time and hard to gauge. But there are other things in my world, transportation, where, you know, I can point to things that I've done locally as far as, you know, securing funds for sidewalks and getting money for Class 2, you know, different roadway projects. But that pales in comparison, like I said, to the drug addiction and to the most vulnerable, and, you know, trying to really, truly bring them up so they can contribute to society. And as Mary said, when you get your feedback from your constituents, you know, the less hate mails you're getting, the better, you know, you're doing. So that's a telltale sign. And if this is our last time to talk, I will say, get out and vote. You know, my father's coming up on 10 years since passing, and he held it near and dear to his heart to encourage people to get out and vote. And it's now easier than ever with all the ballots mailed to you. So please vote, whether you're voting Republican, Democrat, Progressive, Independent, whatever. Just get out and vote.
Thank you, Tim. Cynthia?
So I think you know what's coming. Whenever, if I'm elected to the Senate, whenever I choose not to serve and to run, if I had contributed to reforming the education finance system, I would consider it a success. If I had gotten the state to stop taking money from our children and our teachers and our schools and out of our pockets for non-education purposes, I would consider it a success. We've discussed the education fund quite a bit today, and you can tell it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Maybe it's like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, or maybe like a kaleidoscope, because you change one part and it changes the other part. I'm really good at jigsaw puzzles. So if I go back there, whenever I choose no longer to serve or to run, I would want people to feel she made the education finance system better, fairer, more effective, and helped to control our property taxes, because the property taxes go across almost everything else we talk about tonight. So I would really be focused on that, and all my skills, all my experience would go to that project. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last response, Steve Berry.
I think that the best thing I could do would be to have people sort of understand that I did my best to honor their forebears, that I actually cared about the indigenous people who were here and the settlers who were here, who made this their home and who loved Vermont and wanted it to thrive, who took the rocks and made the hard way and made their little plot of ground, and then they had their gardens, and then they shared their crops. If we can be a place where we have sovereignty, where we have free speech, where we have the right to assemble, where we have bodily autonomy, where we have a right to disagree with our friend and neighbor and not call them a nasty name, where we can actually be in concord with each other and try to have an egalitarian community where everybody has a fair shake, then regardless of whether or not I'm elected, see, that gives meaning to my life anyway. I don't need to be elected to have meaning in my life, because this is what I seek to do anyway. It's a platform to do it for more people, and that's the reason why I'm interested. But that's it. It's not about me. It's about us, and particularly the small farmers and the farms and regenerative agriculture and retaining and making sure that Vermont is green forever.
Thank you. I think we have time for one question from the audience. Judy Murphy has a question. We're about out of time, so we're going to limit you to 30 seconds. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. And we're just going to start with Jim and circle right around. Everybody answer.
I would like to ask each candidate about a question on human rights, human issues. I'd like to ask you to take a stand. I would like to ask each candidate to just say for or against. Are you against or for or against a woman's right to have a safe and legal abortion? Are you for or against LGBTQ rights?
Okay, so Jim,
Absolutely unequivocally for.
both?
Yes.
Thank you.
For.
Mary?
Microphone? Oh, is it on? Okay, thank you. But as far as abortion, and I think it's a bigger picture than just for or against, so I would have to probably say against, even though I do believe in the discussion for a woman to have the right under rape, incest, or the health of the mother.
Okay, thank you. Let's move along.
I'm an honest, straightforward person. I tell you, I'm pro-life. I'm personally against the discrimination on an unborn child. Yes, LGBTQ rights. I'm very much a libertarian person, and yeah, people can do what they can do.
Will?
Not to rush you off, given the mic. So I would say yes to both of those, and in fact, I was very supportive of Prop 5 and helped to organize around that 2 years ago.
And I've personally been on record for supporting every single one of those that's come up before our legislative body.
Thank you.
For and without apology, and for and with pride.
Thank you.
In favor of both, and I think I'm going to take the 30 seconds and say that it's important that we not think just because we've passed a constitutional right for bodily autonomy that there's not ways to undermine it. And so it's still very important that you elect people who are pro-choice, because otherwise you will see those rights. There are ways that they can be undermined, and that will happen.
Thank you.
I'm for a woman's right to safe legal abortions, and I'm for LGBTQ rights.
Thank you.
I'm for both of them.
Thank you.
Vermont voted on abortion and was overwhelmingly in favor of it. It's in our Constitution. I won't seek to fight that. It frankly doesn't matter what I think. The people spoke. LGBTQ, all men are created equal, all women are created equal, and I'll live by that.
Thank you.
And, similarly, as a former Army officer, I'm a strong supporter of the Constitution. Article 22 is part of the Constitution. My opinion doesn't matter. The people have spoken. And I'm for, like Spike said, everybody's created equal. So equal rights for everybody, including LGBTQ.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think we will call this a successful meeting tonight, and a round of applause for the candidates. We have some traditional refreshments, which are apple cider and apple cider donuts in the back corner. And audience, feel free to corner somebody and ask them questions.